What's up, everyone? Welcome to Love and Money, but today it's a bit of a sad conversation. Someone I know passed on last week during the floods that swept away vehicles on Langata Road. Well, today, for those who are not affected, life goes on, but that man's family has lost a husband, a father, a breadwinner. In the event, he had hired some people, let's say maybe a personal assistant, someone to manage his social media pages, maybe some work at his farm in the village. Their livelihoods have been cut short. Let's say he was educating a disadvantaged child or two, just quietly, like many of you great people are doing. That sponsorship ends like that. We must ask ourselves, how long must this continue before we rise up as a country? Every year in Kenya, floods take mothers, fathers, children, neighbors, and breadwinners. In the past few years alone, the numbers are bad. During the devastating 2024 floods in Kenya, at least 315 people lost their lives. More than 300,000 people were displaced and thousands of homes were destroyed. And again, in March 2026, severe rains returned and flooding killed more than 40 people in 1 or 2 days. Roads, homes, and businesses were destroyed. Vehicles were destroyed, properties. On top of the difficult financial circumstances people are already dealing with, there's a genuine sense of grief and loss in many families, and people don't know who to ask for help or what to do. Behind every number is a family. There will be a mother who will never cook for her children again, a father who will never kiss his son or his daughter's forehead again, a child whose future ended before it began. To every family that has lost someone to floods in this country, we really want to stand with you, and this video is dedicated to you. Kenya is not the only place in the world that experiences heavy rainfall. Many countries face storms far stronger than ours, but in some places, flooding rarely turns into a national tragedy. Let's look at two examples, Dubai and the famous Singapore. In April 2024, the United Arab Emirates experienced one of the heaviest rainfalls in its recorded history. Dubai received around 142 millimeters of rain in just 24 hours. To put that into perspective, that is more rain than the city normally receives in an entire 365 days. Airports were flooded, roads became rivers, businesses and homes were flooded. The city experienced the most severe disruption in the history of Dubai. Yet, despite this extraordinary storm, the total number of reported deaths across the UAE was around 5 people. What is key is how the city responded afterwards. In Dubai, emergency teams deployed more than 400 water pumps and about 300 water tankers to remove standing water from roads, neighborhoods, and business districts. At the international airport alone, 22 tanker trucks with vacuum pumps were used to extract water from taxiways and surrounding areas. Arrivals were briefly halted during the storm, but airport operations were largely restored within about a day, while pumping systems continued clearing water for several days in the background. Across the city, recovery teams drained basements, cleared debris, reopened highways, and used heavy pumping infrastructure to move flood water back into drainage systems and towards the sea until normal activity gradually resumed. Now, let's talk about the famous Singapore. The word Singapore has become an inside joke in Kenya, and words were coined particularly during the floods in March 2026. Singapore, 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 etc.
Are we heading to Singapore or are we heading to Singapore?
Hii ni mji wa Singapore. Maji yamefika zaidi ya mita 1.5, lakini kama mnavyoona maisha yanaendelea. Wakazi husafiri kazini kwa boti wakiwa kwenye suti na tai.
Singapore receives about 2,300 millimeters of rain every year, which is more than many parts of Kenya. Rainstorms there can be intense and frequent. In the 1970s, about 3,200 hectares of Singapore were considered flood-prone. Flooding was a regular occurrence. Instead of accepting that situation, the country invested heavily in long-term flood management. Over decades, it built an extensive drainage system of more than 8,000 kilometers of drains, canals, and rivers. Today, the flood-prone area has been reduced from 3,200 hectares to less than 30 hectares. Let me say that again. Today, the flood-prone area has been reduced from 3,200 hectares to less than 30 hectares. That transformation did not happen overnight. It took decades of planning, engineering, enforcement, and maintenance. And I believe this is exactly the source of our pain. Deep down, we know that for Kenya to reach the level of flood management we admire in places like Singapore or Dubai, the transformation would take many years. If we started today and moved steadily, by the time the systems were fully built and maintained, some of the elderly among us will have already passed on from old age. In psychology, there's a concept closely related to this feeling. It's called analysis paralysis. It describes what happens when a person looks at a task that seems enormous, complicated, and time-consuming. Instead of starting, the mind becomes overwhelmed by the scale of the effort required. The result is hesitation, delay, and often complete inaction. Many of us have experienced this on a personal level. You wake up and you've got a long list of tasks. Your to-do is very long. Sometimes the mind becomes so overwhelmed that you end up procrastinating and doing everything except what was on your list the whole day, and nothing gets done. Not because the tasks are impossible, but because the starting point feels too heavy. In many ways, Kenya as a country sometimes behaves the same way. We look at the scale of transformation required, the decades of discipline, investment, and behavioral change it would demand, and we quietly conclude that it is too big to begin. So we laugh, we dismiss the vision, or we postpone the effort. But the truth is, every country that have solved problems like flooding began exactly the same way, by starting somewhere, then continuing steadily year after year until the impossible slowly became normal. Kenya receives on average 500 to 1,200 millimeters of rainfall per year, depending on the region. Our rainfall levels are not unusually extreme compared to, for example, Singapore, which receives about 2,300 millimeters of rain every year, almost double many parts of Kenya. Yet, through decades of drainage investment, it reduced flood-prone land from 3,200 hectares in the 70s to less than 30 hectares today. Some of the investments they had to make was more than 8,000 kilometers of canals and drains and strict urban planning. Yet, when heavy rains arrive in Kenya, the consequences are usually devastating. In 2024, floods killed 315 people in Kenya, approximately. In contrast, the historic storm in the UAE in 2024 resulted in about 5 deaths. Singapore, despite receiving more rainfall annually than Kenya, rarely experiences deadly floods today because of its extensive infrastructure and strict urban planning. These numbers tell us something important. Flood disasters are not determined only by rain. They are determined by preparation. Kenya is not incapable of building effective systems. We have talented engineers, planners, scientists, and entrepreneurs. In the show I did with Irene Mutegi, she shared that one of her biggest mantra in her leadership journey is that we don't miss out on what we wanted because we are incapable. Everything you and I don't have, we can get. The real challenge is mindset. For decades, flooding in Kenya has often been treated as an emergency to respond to rather than a system to prevent. When floods occur, rescue teams are mobilized, emergency shelters are opened, relief food is distributed. Yeah, and these actions are necessary and admirable, but they are happening after the damage has already occurred. True success would mean preventing the disaster before it reaches that stage. This requires serious investment in drainage infrastructure. It requires protecting riparian land, maintaining drainage systems rather than allowing them to clog with waste and debris. But it also requires something deeper, a change in how we live as citizens, and also a change in how we see ourselves at a personal level. Flooding does not happen in a vacuum. When drains are blocked with garbage, water cannot flow. When buildings are constructed on riverbanks, rivers have nowhere to expand during heavy rain. When regulations are ignored or bribed away, systems designed to protect people slowly collapse. Sometimes the difference between disaster and safety is not only engineering, it is behavior. A safer Kenya will require personal responsibility, doing the right thing even when nobody is watching, respecting public spaces, not littering. When you have a soda bottle with you, you hold on to it until you can access a dustbin, protecting waterways, refusing corruption that allows dangerous construction to continue. I mean, we know this, and this we know. Corruption does not begin at the top of society. It doesn't begin with the government, and we like blaming the government, but corruption grows quietly from the bottom to up, from the small compromises we justify in our daily lives. Until the day you and I develop the courage to resist corruption in our own choices, we will continue to produce governments that mirror the same weaknesses. I sometimes speak with single mothers who are dating married men, and nearly all of them say the same thing. They don't like what they're doing, but they feel they must do it for their children to put food on the table. And I get it. Most of us get it. It seems like a necessary evil, and it's a painful reality, but it reveals something about human nature. We say we hate corruption, but we often excuse it when the circumstances feel urgent or personal. A healthy society begins when individuals decide that certain lines cannot be crossed, even when crossing them would make life easier. We must reach a point where we would rather endure hardship, loss, or even danger than participate in actions that diminish our dignity. Because every time we participate in corruption, we dishonor ourselves, and over time, those small choices accumulate into culture. And when corruption becomes culture, the consequences appear everywhere around us, including the broken systems and preventable tragedies we are witnessing today. But there's something else we need. We also need to restore our faith. Singapore was not always the orderly city we see today. In the 1960s and 70s, it faced flooding, poor drainage, and rapid urbanization just like us. Dubai, believe it or not, was once a small desert trading town. Today, it has invested billions of dollars into infrastructure to protect its cities from storms. These places did not become what they are today by accident. They made deliberate choices. They invested in infrastructure. They enforced standards. They maintained what they built. And Kenya can do the same. We are a nation of more than 50 million people with enormous talent, creativity, and resilience. Imagine a Kenya where drainage systems are maintained the whole year round, where urban planning protects rivers instead of squeezing them into narrow spaces, where communities work together to keep waterways clear. Imagine a country where the rainy season no longer fills families with fear. That future is possible, but it begins with a shift in mindset. A friend of mine had been over 100 kilograms for as long as I had known her, almost 20 years. Then she began losing weight, a few kilos every year for about 5 years. One day I saw her and I was genuinely worried. I thought she might be dying. As we were talking, she shared about her long, hard journey to get there. It took a whole mind shift, an internal transformation that enabled her to change her lifestyle and her own view of herself. She told me in a very relaxed manner, "Lily, a time like this next year, I will be your size." I made the mistake of laughing because I truly thought she was joking. I simply could not imagine her my size. And it's not that I wished her ill, I just thought she already looks okay and she must be joking. But she didn't laugh back because in her mind, it was already done. She knew where she was going and she just knew she would achieve her goals. And that makes me think about something else. Why do we laugh when politicians say that Kenya will one day be like Singapore or Dubai? Perhaps for the same reason that Sarah in the Bible laughed when she was told she would bear a child in her old age. She had been barren all her life, but forget that. Now she was deep inside menopause. It sounded laughable, but the moment a people begin to know that they will get there, the laughter stops. When you and I truly believe that Kenya can become orderly, efficient, and disciplined like the nations we admire, it will no longer depend on which president is in power. It will become something deeper than politics. It will become conviction. And when conviction spreads among the people, we will move towards that future with or without any single leader. First, we must believe that Kenya is capable of excellence. Second, we must begin living differently, doing the right thing even when it does not immediately pay, protecting the public good, making decisions that are inspired by compassion, honesty, and faith. So, as we close, let's return to where we began. To the families who have lost loved ones to floods in Kenya, your grief matters. Your loss is not forgotten. May we honor those lives not only with sympathy, but with determination. Determination to shun corruption at a personal level until it becomes our culture, our tradition. Let the world one day say that Kenyans are honest people. Let's have determination to care for one another and to create a Kenya where heavy rainfall no longer means tragedy. May the memory of those we have lost inspire us to build a safer nation for generations to come.